Hey, everybody, welcome. My name is Tom Peters. I'm the Dean of Library Services. I see Greg's here and Mark's here, so let's get started. Looks like we've got about 21 people attending online. This session is being recorded. I should let you know that. All right, so let's get started. So our two panelists today are Herman. He's an associate professor at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design, as well as the director of the Fay and Gus Jones House Stewardship at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. He received his master's degree in architecture from Rice University down in Houston, where he was awarded the William Dunlap Darden Medal, and his Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Cincinnati. Since joining the faculty at the University of Arkansas School of Architecture in 1991, that's 31 years ago, Greg, so you've been there a while. He's been a three-time recipient of the Mott Outstanding Teacher Award and was awarded the Tau Sigma Delta Medal in 2007. He's been involved in many development projects, design building projects. He recently worked with students to redesign Miss Gloria's Kitchen in New Orleans. It was a restaurant that had been gutted and shuttered since Hurricane Katrina flooded the city quite a few years ago. So Greg, welcome.
Thank you.
And then our second panelist is Mark Wheeler. He's the Director of Planning, Design, and Construction at and University Architect at Missouri State University here on the Springfield campus. He oversees all capital projects on Missouri State's main campus and satellite campuses, including the upcoming multi-million-dollar addition and renovation to Temple Hall, which is a huge project, I know. In addition, he's held an instrumental role in setting the vision for the future of Missouri State's campuses through a comprehensive master plan and his involvement with the city of Springfield to update the 30-year regional vision plan. He's a licensed architect with over 22 years of experience in practice and holds a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Drury University. Mark serves on numerous boards and committees across the architectural profession and academia, including his current term as AIA Springfield Board Past President. Projects Mark has designed and been involved with have received over 40 national and international design awards. Most recently, 2 university projects were exhibited at the 2021 Venice Biennale and in the 2022 winter issue of Iowa Architect. So I'm from Iowa, so that's pleases me. And I think one of those recent projects, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that amazing dog trot structure that you designed and built down near the Chase Studios in Taney County. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, and you're correct.
Good for you. All right, well, let's start with, so our topic is what's commonly referred to as giraffe style architecture. It's native flagstone architecture. And maybe if Melissa, you want to bring up maybe the, give people a sense of what we're talking about here, giraffe style architecture. Do either or both of you want to take a stab at, what constitutes giraffe style architecture?
Well, we're seeing it. It's defined by random stone application. Are you getting an echo at all? I'm hearing myself speak, so I don't know if that sounds better. Okay, yeah, the random stone application in a non-structural vertical application, as you see here, sometimes accented at the corners by brick coins, or in some cases a window surround. Of the period, I would say, and this is just estimating from about 1920 to 1950, but there are more recent and including current day examples.
Mark, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. There's several different, I guess, variations that you may see with the stonework. here locally, more what I would call almost a shot put boulder field stone application, which really I think lies outside of the definition we're really looking at. More as you see in these pictures here, it's more of a flat stone that is either sandstone or limestone. Can be, typically is a veneer. Sometimes it's used as a load bearing stone, but that's more, I would say, rare from at least what I've seen. It's also not limited to houses as you're seeing here. It's there's churches, there's gateways to cemeteries, more civic buildings that we find it on, but again, mostly smaller structures in nature.
I'm not an architect. I have no architectural training, but yeah, as I drive around and take photographs of what I think of as giraffe style architecture, yeah, I don't know, it's flagstone. So I don't know, pick a thickness, 3 inches. If it's more than 3 inches, then it's a stone, stone building, but not giraffe style. And then for me, the perfect, or the ideal, the platonic ideal of a giraffe stone building, the mortar is raised, kind of a half circle, and often either painted or pigmented at the point that it's applied. So we've got some examples in this. So anyway, but there's a lot of variations on Timmins Temple here that you're looking at. I would say that's more of a rock stone structure, not a giraffe stone structure.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any that were painted by original intention. I think that it became much more of a later modification, though the raised joint also is something that occurs occasionally, but not as a rule. It depends on the mason and the region.
While we're talking about definitions and boundaries, so another thing I've noticed with this style of architecture, there are certain examples where sometimes the smaller stone in a flagstone interface it protrudes from the surface of the wall. Have you ever run across that? And does that have any particular? Is that just like a style or?
Well, again, in my experience here in Northwest Arkansas, the examples typically, I don't see exactly what you're describing. What I do see is frequently some of the more interesting stones, I'll call them, the special stones, are reserved for locations that might come into contact with hands. For instance, there might be a fossil piece that is right next to the door, or something that has an unusual color or an unusual shape. I have seen that example. I haven't seen examples of relief as you're describing it typically.
Okay, so anything else about just sort of basic definition? And I guess the general class, we're librarians, so we like to classify things, but the general class is stone-based architecture.
Mm-hmm.
So everything from a rock wall to, I don't know, but giraffe stone is just one type of, in talking to some people, the other thing that let me back up and ask another question. So I've heard people say, well, that was just field stone, but in talking to some people around a region about giraffe stone homes, is that actually, at least in some instances, it was locally quarried, I guess you'd say, but not necessarily on site. So there were known places where there were, good giraffe stone could be gotten. So for example, one of these images I have is of High Lambeth, an amazing 95-year-old gentleman standing out in front of his home. He said the stone for that, when the house was built in 1941, came from about 10 miles away, a particular point where they knew that there was some good flagstone there. Yeah, there it is. So that was not like just found around near where the house was built, but it was brought in from about approximately 10 miles away.
Yeah, I think, Tom, the point on quarry, I'd use that term probably a little loosely, at least from the experience that I've seen. Like we have on campus, we have a lot of stone, which is limestone that comes from the Phoenix quarry, which is somewhat local to us, but that's a more industrial kind of massive application of quarry in a more traditional sense, where there's these large limestone beds that are heavy machinery or drilling and excavating that stone. I think when you mention quarry here, it's much more of a low industrial application where essentially there's an outcropping of a bed of stone because of the Ozarks regional's karst topography, where these moments appear where rock juts out of the landscape, and then folks could come and essentially quarry that, but again at a low kind of more industrial application there. But we are seeing that happen from time to time in these. But again, the quarry locations is really remote or local to the location of the building, as opposed to, again, a more industrial quarry application that we know of today.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I mean, I think
That's true in Northwest Arkansas as well. There's a group of stone houses. I happen to be sitting in one right now in Fayetteville that form a small neighborhood that rumored to have been quarried on site. That's not been confirmed. The interesting thing is one interesting aspect is most of the rock comes out of the ground as it's applied in the wall. That is to say, it hasn't necessarily been shaped in any way. It comes out fairly flat and smooth due to the geologic description that you've provided. So yeah, and I think it is generally defined by local sourcing.
Another thing I heard that you can either corroborate or refute is that, as you said, Greg, roughly from 1920 to 1950, or, I don't know how the style got started. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it was less expensive than really any alternative, clapboards or brick, or, I mean, in some ways, like almost like a folk siding, because if you didn't have a lot of money to build a house, well, this was one way to kind of cut expenses.
Sure. I mean, you could imagine how easy it is to pull rocks out of the ground and clean them off and put them up on the wall. I mean, there is no milling involved. There's no shaping. There's no painting needed. So sure, I can easily imagine that. Fay Jones here in Northwest Arkansas went at the beginning of his career. His use of stone in part was due to the fact that at the time it was the cheapest material he could lay his hands on, cheaper than clapboard siding, cheaper than brick, cheaper than dressed stone. So rubble stone or irregular stone, as it's pulled from the quarry site, it was an economical choice.
And just to follow up on that, as I go around and take photographs and talk to people, most of the extant giraffe structures, really, because they're not all homes, are in amazingly good shape. Almost like the mortar used in giraffe stones, I would say, holds up better than even like brick and mortar. I don't know if it's the regularity, how moisture flows off of the, when there's a hard driving rain. So have either of you noticed that, and I actually asked owners, like, have you ever had tuck point this? That was at Hyde Lambeth. The house was built in 1941. He goes, no, so it hadn't been tuck pointed in, 80 plus years. I think you just find that amazing.
Boy, I wish I could corroborate that. Unfortunately, I can't. They all, especially given that it's a monolithic construction. Typically, there are no expansion joints, no other construction joints, and the land in the Northwest Arkansas area is notoriously shifty. and buildings move, and they take the ground moves, and they take the buildings with them. So yeah, there's quite a bit of maintenance required, just as any other building, really.
I think one point though that Tom, what you may be seeing is, unlike brick structures that we have even locally, that in this region that we're talking, the region goes through a tremendous amount of freeze-thaw cycles, and brick can withstand that. But you see that brick they're little sponges, so they will take water in, and then over time, those faces can pop off, so you'll see spalling. When you have more natural stone like what we have here in these examples, I mean, you're talking about a product that's been in the earth the amount of time that it has, and it's a real argument for doing more native applications of building design and materials, but it doesn't necessarily have the same detriments that brick has as the freeze-thaw cycle. Then with the mortars, when that mortar that you talked about, some that are concave, naturally that's just a better way to shed water. The Masonry Institute, they recommend certain joints and bricks for the mortar. The more it's flush or sheds water, the better. So I think you're seeing some of that. What I've seen more with the degradation of the stone is really the structure around it when water is getting behind it, or you have issues with the roof like you would with any other structure. Then that obviously causes failing of these structures much quicker.
Regarding the origins of the style, so one of our attendees asked that this style was encouraged by FDR and the entire New Deal. Of course, the use of this type of architectural design predates the New Deal. But I don't know if FDR and the New Deal encouraged it. I've also heard rumors, uncorroborated, that, at least by me, that extension services, agricultural extension services, encourage this type of architecture. Do either of you have any sense of, why did this, pardon the pun, crop up when it did? Was it a grassroots kind of thing? We need cheap, it's cheap, it's plentiful, or was there some kind of centralized effort?
A couple of points you brought up. I'm not aware of any official determination by the Roosevelt administration towards this or any other style. What did happen in agricultural extension groups was not so much a recommendation of giraffe stone, but rather houses that are very similar to these, very small. We might describe them as Cape Cods. Sometimes they're a little bit more of a bungalow. So the house itself very often came from models that were described in agricultural extension bulletins. The enclosure, the siding, the skin on the buildings was just a local change, a local idea.
Yeah, in doing some research, it appears that New Deal, the FDR New Deal in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, there was some bridges that were funded by that are giraffe stone. But I think I'm not really sure the connection there, other than that funding mechanisms. That seems to be an outlier for maybe what we see from most of these. To me, it's really about kind of the Midwest way and the Ozarks way. It's there's opportunity and necessity. So these are really born out of needs. And then obviously in an impoverished time that we were suffering in the 30s when a lot of these were built, I think it was just born out of that. And then some of the, over time, you see some kind of artistic expressions that come out in the stone, some of the relief that you mentioned, and some of the locations where the hand was near that Greg mentioned. You start to see this becoming an expression, which again, you really see that through the course of architectural evolutions, that really one thing is born out of necessity. And then as craft comes in and craftsmen try to kind of hone their craft and technique, then more artistic expression comes in. And that's what's really interesting to me about it, is some of those almost pulling away from the exact necessity and getting these expressive elements that occur.
Yeah, so one of my favorites, I saw this down in Arkansas a couple of weeks ago. So it's just a giraffe chimney, but they made a point of having I don't know, a milled heart-shaped stone placed right in the center of the chimney. So you get those kind of, like you say, that craft element coming into this design. The introduction of brick into the design in the later years seemed like it's pretty common for me because, again, I'm not an architect, but one of the real challenges is getting those nice straight edges at the corners, and brick helps solve that sort of design challenge.
Yeah, Tom, I'm sure you've come across Silas Owens quite a bit. In Central Arkansas, Silas Owens, who is, at least in Arkansas, credited with if not originating, then making popular what he referred to as the mixed masonry style. Owens, who happened to be African American, was a builder and was known for, actually, you can more or less tell a Silas Owens building because of the way he accents the window surrounds and the coined corners with brick, in addition to, again, what he referred to as mixed masonry.
That's a good point. And, I've heard, I just don't know enough about this style of architecture, but if you really get into it, sometimes you can actually identify who was the person that did that building, but just based on the style.
Mm-hmm.
Truth to that you can, you could almost like classify the different types that are out there by the person.
Yeah. Tom, I don't know if you've discovered any practitioners. Silas Owens is the only one that I can name at this point. There may be others in the Northwest Arkansas area. Silas Owens practiced primarily in Central Arkansas, and I don't know about Missouri at all.
Well, I do know, I interviewed the grandson of a Giraffe Stone Mason, who did a lot of work over in Texas County, where Houston, Missouri is. And he became known for his giraffe style homes. I need to get over there and do some more photographs of the extant buildings. But there's one there in Texas County. I think he did that church on the left. A whole subgenre of these things is giraffe style homes where they've been added on to. There's actually one that I drive by quite often. I haven't stopped to take a photograph of it, but a house was added on. It was a giraffe stone house. It was added onto it. So then they added more giraffe stone to kind of blend in, but it's painfully obvious that you can see where the roof line was extended to accommodate the addition to the house.
Yeah.
But while we're still talking, so geography matters here. So, different giraffe stone masons were active in different regions of the Ozarks. Actually, my colleague, Rachel Basara, I knew of giraffe stone, but I really haven't paid much attention to them. And we're working on this project to do feature the Ozarks region at the 2023 Smithsonian Folklife Festival. And so in the context of these planning meetings, they often encourage whatever folk culture is being highlighted at any particular festival to do what they call big build. You build something right on the National Mall there in DC. And so we had long, fruitful conversations about, well, what are we going to build? Mark, you know me, I put in a pitch for a dog trot house, but not unique to the Ozarks. And it would be a big build. Ozarks are the cave, a lot of caves in the Ozarks. So could we do some kind of, so anyway, Rachel said, well, why don't we do a giraffe style home? And do either of you know so we know there are instances in Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. Sometimes a little bit of southeast Kansas is considered part of the Ozarks region. I don't know, I've been over there to scour that 16 square miles or whatever it is to see if there's any giraffe stone architecture there. And other people argue that parts of southern Illinois are part of the Ozarks. I don't know if there's draft stone. I've heard rumors that there's some draft stone architecture down in Texas. Do you know anything about the geographic extent of it? How far, how far out did it go?
I do not, Mark. I don't know if you have a take on that.
No, my experience has really been in the region we're talking about, going into a little bit in Oklahoma, but primarily in Missouri, Arkansas, and then really that's the center of the region that I've seen it.
And then while we're, something else I want to just get out there on the table is that, there's still a lot of examples of this architecture out there, but as Greg said, you still see it used occasionally. But it really, I think as a dominant style or a semi-dominant style, it kind of faded in the 60s, I would guess. There's a lot of it out there now, but we can't preserve it all, but is this style of architecture at risk over the next 50, 100 years of sort of passing away?
Yeah, I think certainly it is. I mean, we've seen that along even Route 66. If you drive from, the center of Springfield here, and if you drive out to Oklahoma, there's some amazing structures along that path that are old gas stations, some of which are draft stone and some are not. But over time, as that highway has become less significant with the interstate system, those structures are being lost. And I think same thing's going to happen here as new development occurs. And I definitely think it's part of our heritage that it should be preserved. I mean, I'm not native to the Springfield area or the Ozarks, but I grew up in a rural region that's similar in South Central Kentucky. When I first came here, I thought how hideous some of these were. And I'm not sitting here today saying that some of them are not hideous, but I've also come to appreciate them for the origins. And again, that speaks to our heritage and locality. And again, there's a lot of truth and honesty in the materials. They are what they are, and they're not trying to really be anything that they're not. And then recently, I've almost been thinking about this comparison between these structures and Picasso's The Weeping Women from 1937, or maybe a few other his portraits that you kind of drive by one and you're like, man, that is hideous. But then there's something that really kind of draws you in at times. And it makes you, because of some of these details and these sunbursts that you find, or the hearts, there's like these layers of looking at this, that the closer you get, the more you see. You'd pulled up a picture of that, a primitive hut by Louisier, and that was mid 1700s when he wrote his essay on architecture. And he was trying to define what architecture was and is. And again, that's coming off really a Baroque style that was heavily intense on ornamentation and decoration. And he was really trying to define, what does it mean? What does architecture mean? What does it mean from a primitive level? And if we go back to our region in the Ozarks, this is part of our heritage of, this is what this means for us, because again, it exists here in this region like nowhere else. And again, it's based on just some real agrarian, practical things that again, I think speak to truth and honesty of our area. So I think they should be preserved for sure.
And Mark, you bring up an interesting aspect. When I moved here from 1,500 miles away, and I thought that these buildings were phenomenally ugly. And I'm pretty certain it was at that point that the gods decided that I, as an architect, would be living in one of them for the greater part of my productive life, and so that has come to be true. But regarding the and of course it grows on you over time. And what I've come to embrace is the fact that this is truly a true regional style that occurs. I'm going to call these modernist, because they're not they're not they don't go they're fairly recent. So I'm going to say it's a fairly reasonable modernist vernacular that is absolutely valuable. And there's no question about should these or should these not be preserved. Absolutely, they should. And that brings up a whole nother area, the specter of preservation in an area that's growing tremendously. And that, we could devote an entire session just to that.
Those are good points. So let's talk about maybe how this type of architecture has been used in the Ozarks, just to kind of set it up. So definitely homes, everything from very modest homes to some pretty substantial homes. There's several stores that I've encountered in the Ozarks and store-like buildings. Schools, and the one over in Thomasville, Missouri, I think, I need to double check that, but I think that might have been a WPA project. So there might have been some kind of, that aspect to it. Certainly a lot of churches use, that one there, the school in Thomasville. I'm thinking that might have been a WPA project, but I'm not absolutely certain. It's now used as a museum, and I think there's some other city offices in there. So just to the extent, and of course, tourist cabins and things like that, and little things. The blank wall one there, Melissa, that I've got near the end of this slide set was, that was actually at a gas station just south of Springfield, Missouri. And I was, we live in the age of Zoom. And so I had to join a Zoom call when I was out driving, and I just pulled into this gas station to join the Zoom call. And of course, I always pay rapt attention during Zoom calls. So I was not looking around at my surroundings. And as the Zoom call was wrapping up, I looked up and here's this giraffe roll right in front of me. And I'm guessing that gas station might have been built in the 70s or the 80s, and I don't know how the decision was made to use giraffe stone, but it was made. So, it's like, as Greg said, it's still used almost as, I don't know, maybe, I don't know why they use it. If it's this homage to a different time and place, or it's so plug ugly, as both of you, I think, have noted, that it's almost, charmingly ugly. What are your thoughts about just how it's been used over time in different types of structure? Of course, the two-story structure versus the single-story structure is another component. I don't know how high you could go with giraffe stone if you get to three. I don't think I've seen a three-story giraffe stone building. You run into all kinds of just design construction challenges.
Sure. I mean, as a facing material, it's relatively unlimited. And I don't see any reason why it couldn't be on a three-story building. But just to give you an idea of how it's most recently received, my colleague here in the school, Marlon Blackwell, who has a celebrated practice among architects nationally, is working on a health services building for the Walton family in Bentonville, and at least the ground floor of that building will be clad in giraffe stone, in a decidedly modern application. So I think that with this panel, with some other applications with giraffe stone appearing here and there, I think there's much more of an awareness of it than there has been in past years, and a desire to embrace it.
I wonder now if any kind of cultural architectural movement regarding style, you almost immediately get people that love it and people who hate it. Do either of you have any sense of was this seen as like, the people's architecture? And if you were a member of the intelligentsia in a local community, the Chamber of Commerce types, would they be like, oh no, that's awful stuff, don't do that? I mean, any sense of like, who championed this?
Yeah, I'm not sure who championed it. That's when I go back to, it was an outcropping of opportunity and necessity based on economies. And I think it's kind of ironic is when we typically talk about architectural styles, there's architects or designers. Well, let's use the word designer more distinctly. Let's keep it with architects. But architects were involved strategically with those movements. Whereas what we're seeing here, I've often wondered, is there an architect involved in any of these? I'm not saying there's not. Perhaps the more civic buildings, there was an architect involved, but a lot of these smaller homes that you see around, certainly there wasn't an architect involved in that. So it's again, it speaks to our area. There's a great architectural history in our area, especially where Greg is at with, yeah, he mentions Marlon Blackwell, and before him, the predecessor of Fay Jones. But Fay was trying to use materials that he could, coming off, Frank Lloyd Wright and the Prairie style. He was looking at using wood in a very different way, and you have that occur in Thorncrown Chapel. So to me, it's really born out of those things of necessity more than just trying to create this new style.
And in fact, I would go so far as to say that architects avoided it for the most part, and it's only recently that I've seen a couple of examples where architects working perhaps in the forefront of practice have been interested in using it for their buildings.
Another question has come in from our audience. Are any of us aware of anything that has been published to document these structures? Either of you know of, if you'd only read one thing about Giraffe Stone, what would it be?
Mm-hmm.
There's some articles I've come across, but I haven't seen what I would consider a serious publication addressing these, but I've not found it.
Yeah, same. The critical treatment has mostly been in academic environments. I don't think that there's been a popular description of Giraffe Stone published that I'm aware of.
No, I haven't found anything either. And, I like, as with Mark, I found articles, but, I call them appreciation articles. They're not real scholarly, but they just sort of like, hey, this is cool. Let's talk about this for a little bit here, which is fine, but it's just not really in-depth scholarship, I would say. Melissa, could you pull up that one? It's second column, third from the top. It's the red highlights in Hickory Barren. Second column from the left. There you go. Pull that one up. So this is up by Hickory Barren, north of Springfield. There are, I was fascinated with this, but it's kind of hard to see, but just by the roof line there's a piece of red stone. It's not really, I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. It's like enamel. It might have been an urn of some sort, some kind of a.
Yeah, it looks like glazed ceramic.
It's glazed ceramic, yeah. And so the mason added those kind of highlights. There are actually several points in this building is actually, we're losing it. The roof's gone and it's not long for this world. But I just thought that was interesting how they chose certain stones just to bring out highlights, I guess.
A number of buildings around here have the occasional insertion of a piece of granite in various places in the wall, or I've seen marbles that have been, toy marbles that have been embedded in the wall as a, I don't know so much as a maker's mark, but as a humble builder's moment of humor in building.
Yeah, so there's an element of whimsy to this, I guess, this style of architecture. Someone made a comment, the city of Springfield paid for a state-sponsored study several years ago to identify rock structures within the city. So that's good to know because, even just trying to take a census of Giraffe Stone buildings in the Ozarks would be a monumental undertaking.
Yeah, again, I'm not aware of any concerted effort to develop a survey of the buildings, and you know, it seems wherever I drive, I discover a couple more hiding in the woods someplace. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it would be a difficult process, but certainly I'm willing to support somebody who gives it a try.
So Springfield did it. You know, once you know that there's a certain time period that it was a popular, relatively popular style, then you just go to that area of town where that's when homes were being built. You know, you're not going to go out to the McMansion area and hope to find some giraffe stone architecture. You got to go to where that's where they were building houses at that time. So older parts of Springfield, when I'm driving around and elsewhere, it's like that's where you're going to find that stuff. And I don't know, you know, you mentioned Tahlequah. So I was over in Tahlequah and I was impressed by how many giraffe stone structures were over there. But you said that was actually kind of that was an effort, sort of a concerted effort to introduce that style of architecture in Tahlequah.
Well, I'd come across an article about that FDR New Deal, that they'd taken advantage of that. So yeah, I think that's the effort I was referring to there. Again, certain regions had more access to this stone, and to me, that's one of the more interesting things about it is you see a shift in the colors and shapes and sizes depending on what area you're in, Arkansas versus us, versus when you start to get over there into Oklahoma. So again, I think it really amplifies the vernacular there, which as an architect, that is intriguing, is to see the uniqueness of a structure. There's been a movement for years, you know, that we would build, and that was one of Frank Lloyd Wright's mantras, is build what's appropriate to the site or to the area. And in this mass production age, we've really gotten away from that, and to our detriment from a sustainability perspective, from a energy use perspective, but I also think from an architectural perspective. So there's a lot of qualities that we talk about in architecture and academically that these houses kind of inhibit, or these structures inhibit. But again, the aesthetics, it does kind of harken back to the Picasso, maybe Cubist kind of genre, where there's many times I almost cringe when I look at them. Again, I wish I had some examples I could send to the group of some of the more what I'd call hideous examples.
Yes.
But you know, just as a lay person, not an architect, some of them are quite nice. So that when they're that's
Sure.
a church Jonathan. I mean, to me that's an attractive structure.
You know, they're all endearing, and as one comes to appreciate, one comes to accept and notice the care and the craft that goes into them, and the distinctions from place to place that make them more valuable and go beyond mere visual appreciation, I think. So yeah, we've all been kind of stuck in the ooh, look at that, to the point that it eventually becomes something that we pursue.
Someone made a comment that Kaufman Station south of Lebanon on Highway 5 has a number of geodes embedded in the walls.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming those have been cracked so that the inner beauty is then embedded face out, but that's the assumption I'm making, but I don't know. Maybe that's not correct. So, you know, you got little marbles and, you know, shards of ceramic and all kinds of things, little, you know, hearts that are embedded in. And I know there's a tourist court over on West College, which is part of Route 66 back in the day. My understanding, I need to go over there and verify, but that every cabin, it's all giraffe stone, but every cabin has its own style.
Mm-hmm. And these are the aspects that keep the giraffe style within the realm of craft, and historically have kept it out of the realm of high or academic architecture. And I think it needs to be appreciated in light of those facts, that this is a craft architecture, that it is a highly local, highly variable, and ultimately beautiful in that understanding.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the marbles and the geodes and the red enamel stone that you show, to me, when you see those, there's a clear intent behind that, and it leaves kind of mystery and question. Like you said yourself, Tom, was like, well, why did they do that? It's like, yeah, is there something behind that, like a time capsule, or is it, did a kid walk by when his dad had placed a mortar and put a marble in? I mean, we don't know the answers to these things, but to me, that's kind of the mystery behind it. And it's really a mark of the hand. When we see structures built today, the hand is kind of lost in that. Even with brick buildings, everything's so finely machined and factory controlled that you really lose kind of like Greg said, this maker's mark to some of our more contemporary structures, which I think, to me, that's one of the most intriguing things about these, is that you see the handiwork in this, or the mark of the hand in some of these. And then again, there's question and mystery about why things were done the way they were.
Melissa, can we go back to that one that was you just had before of, it's the one with the brick, it's lower left in the tile here. Yeah, that one. So this is, the whole, and then we'll open it up for more Q&A, but that whole thing with brick embellishments, I guess this is the one that I've seen that's the most embellished. I don't know what's going on here visually, but they thought, in addition to kind of the framing element of the brick, then they had these kind of fronds, I guess you call them, brick fronds that are jutting out from the sides and the top of the doorway. Clearly, I look at this and I think whoever did that thought that this was the bee's knees, this was something cool. Any thoughts on kind of this is the most elaborate brick embellishment that I've seen to date. Any thoughts on brick embellishment per se?
The only thing that I would say about it is again cite the work of Silas Owens, who used brick commonly and consistently as a window surround, as a wall edge. So I think that there was a desire on the part of the mason in this case to leave their mark, to leave their trademark. I have not seen too many examples with brick to be able to come to a conclusion.
Okay.
The previous example, I mean, that's quite difficult to execute if you really look at that picture. When you have those arcs that are being formed and it's symmetrical at the front entry, and it appears, at least based on the picture, that they're very symmetrically matched. So there's a lot of work to execute that. We talked about these really being a product of function, but this is an example of where it pulls away from just finding stone in a field and throwing it on a house. There was direct work and labor and effort put towards that. And, aesthetically or architecturally, we could debate that, but I'm certain what you said, Tom, that whoever executed that work, I would say they were quite proud of their endeavor.
Yeah. And Melissa, could we go to the next one after that, the jail? Because, a good panel discussion ends with a threat. So Greg, you've been condemned to live in a Giraffe Stone house, but if you don't straighten up and fly right, we're going to put you in the Donovan jail, which is also Giraffe Stone.
Well, it's revealed itself over time to have a few other secrets. What is the backup behind the stone? In the case of my own house, it's a hollow clay tile backup. So it really is in the end, a monolithic system. I'm sure there are a number of examples where it's applique on a frame system, but you know, it keeps me looking.
I've also seen, true, but what's behind it is also equally interesting. I've also seen, I guess I would call it a stucco base behind the Giraffe stone. All right, so I want to thank you two for participating. We're about to the top of the hour. We have time for, if anybody has, you know, another burning question, now would be the time.
And if folks don't, let me leave you my email. It's gherman, GHERMAN @uark.edu. I'd be happy to talk to anybody, and if anybody wants to see the Faye and Gus Jones house, if they find themselves in Northwest Arkansas, please do contact me in advance and I'll set up a tour of the house for you. Happy to have you.
And also when talking about the documentary evidence, so the local public radio station did a piece about that with you about Giraffe Style Architecture. So that's out there too.
Yep, that was last fall. KUAF here in Fayetteville, our public radio station, had a short piece on local examples of Giraffe stone.
Okay, well, thanks to both of you, and it's a very interesting architectural style. And my working hypothesis is it's almost unique to the Ozarks. You know, what are the boundaries of the Ozarks? That's a point of endless discussion and debate. But if anybody knows of anything down in Texas or anywhere else that you'd say, well, that's Giraffe style, let me know, because I'm trying to, you know, try to get a sense of how extensive geographically was this architectural style. So with a threat and a question, we're going to conclude this panel discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.